Hello, I'm Professor Steve Moore of the English Department at Terra State Community College. My colleague and I, Professor Pete Landino, are putting on this tutorial on APA formatting on behalf of the Allied Health faculty, the Allied Health program, and the psychology faculty, the psychology program. I'd like to talk a little bit about what we're doing in terms of APA format as an introduction to a multi-part module series that we're producing for you. First, I'd like to talk a little bit about what APA format is. It's simply a publication format. Various disciplines have publication formats that they use in publishing professional research articles in various journals within their field. The most common publishing formats are MLA, sponsored by the Modern Language Association, APA, the one we'll be talking about today, American Psychological Association, and CBE. MLA formatting is used in language studies, in English, literature studies, and oftentimes in the humanities. CBE used in some history journals, some history books, and also in some of the science journals. APA, as you might have guessed from American Psychological Association, is the publication format for psychology and most sciences. There really is no one standard publication format. All three of them are very common, but we'll be talking about APA today. It's important to note what a publication format is. It is simply a means of organizing a written text into a standard format. It does not mean that it is the writing itself. In other words, one could have a perfectly formatted paper in APA style or MLA style and still have very poor writing. The format is simply that. It's just a format. Why do formats exist? Well, they exist for a couple of reasons. One is to provide a standardized organization principle for papers in that field so that attention is drawn to the contents of the writing, not to idiosyncratic various styles of page layout that somebody might put together just off the cuff because they think it looks good. When we have a standard format, we have a means by which we can organize and focus the written text, focusing the reader's attention on what's being said, not so much on how it's being said and how it's being presented. That's one reason. Another reason publication formats exist is to provide a standardized means of citing sources. Citing sources means when you use an outside piece of research to support a point that you have to make in your text, you give credit where credit is due. If you quote someone, you cite the author's name, the year of publication, when it was published, and so forth. If you use statistics, those aren't your statistics, you didn't generate them, you have to provide information about where you got those statistics. If you use pictures, video clips, anything like that in a text, you have to document where you got those. So the second reason for a publication format, and APA is no exception, is to provide a formalized mechanism for authors to cite other people's work that they use within their own written text. That's very important. It's important because you're giving credit where credit is due. You are respecting intellectual property rights, and that is a legal term. There are such things as intellectual property rights, and there is such a thing as intellectual property. In order to respect those rights and in order to not infringe upon intellectual property, we need to document and to cite our sources. If we don't, we are opening ourselves to charges of plagiarism. Plagiarism is defined as the use of someone else's intellectual property as though it's your own in violating their rights and their ownership of that property. You don't want to plagiarize. You want to give credit where credit is due because it's the ethical thing to do. Also, you want to give credit where credit is due and cite your sources because it generates credibility for you as a writer. You are showing that you've done your homework, that you know what you're talking about, and you demonstrate that within the text, in parentheses at the end of a sentence where you've used some source or another, documenting where that source came from. You also document at the end of the text in a references page. So those are the reasons why we use publication format, and certainly APA fits quite well into one of those. APA is the publication format of the sciences, and it's primarily designed for the sciences. In that context, it's very well suited. There are sections of APA where you go through the scientific method that you use, the experimental setup, the literature review, and the conclusions you draw from an experiment. It's not particularly well suited for undergraduate research paper writing of this variety you're probably most familiar with, but there is a variation of APA format called meta-analysis format, and that's the one we'll be using today as we demonstrate how to format your papers in APA style. Now that we have an introduction to APA, I'd like to go over the parts of the style format that we'll be covering. The first that we'll be covering is literally the page layout, how you make the pages in an APA formatted paper look. So the page layout is first. Then we'll be covering in-text documentation of sources. You're probably familiar with those. Those documentations occur in parentheses at the end of sentences. Next, we'll be covering the references page in APA where you list literally all of the references you looked at to inform your thinking on this piece of writing that you're putting together. And finally, we'll be looking at some of the more peculiar or specific and more in-depth parts of APA style. So without further ado, let's get on with what we have here, and we'll be moving first to the page layout in APA style. Thank you.